Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and I am here to do an update of what I have been reading in the past week. Now, this past week has not been the best reading week for a while, and that's because I've been very busy. As I have said before in previous videos, I am putting my house up for sale in July, and the last week I have had to do 3 interviews with real estate agents, hire one of those agents, and sign a contract. And each interview and the contract signing each took about 2 hours. So that's 8 hours out of the week that I lost. I have also had to do carpet cleaning for my house. I have had to pack up things and move them into storage. So not as much reading as I would have liked. And for the first book, I'm actually going to talk about a book I read very early in this month, and that is Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett. And this was an audiobook, and it is a fantasy book. Now, I don't normally read a lot of fantasy books, but I do pick them up every now and then. And the reason I picked up this book is that I had read a previous trilogy called The Divine Cities, and that was a pretty decent fantasy series. I liked it enough that when this book went on a 2-for-1 sale on Audible a couple months ago, I said, okay, I'll pick up this book. And I just got around to finishing it this week or last week. And it's basically the story of a young woman, Sancha, who's about 20 years old, and she is a thief. And she is a very special thief because you find out very early on that she has a talent that no other thief has. And this talent makes her very good at stealing things. And she has been hired to steal an object from the wharf, which is highly guarded. And she does steal that object. But in stealing that object, she sets a wharf fire, which burns down about 1/3 of the wharf. And that is going to bring into play a secondary character named Gregor Danilo. And I'll talk about him in a minute. But what she does is she opens this object that she was supposed to steal. And the rules that she was given through her offense was don't look at the object. But she does, and it turns out to be a magical key that talks to her. And it can talk to her because she has this special talent. And you know, I sort of raised my eyebrows. A talking key and a talking snarky key. And I went along with it. Just because that's the way it was. And again, when she set the wharf fire, she got the enmity of this guy named Gregor Danilo, and he was the wharf master, and he is out to find this thief. Now, one of the things about this world is it's fantasy, and of course, there is magic. And the magic works by the way of you put scrivings on objects, and the scrivings basically alter that item's perception of reality. So you can tell a wagon that its wheels are rolling downhill, even if it's on a flat surface. So that wagon will just start moving magically. Now, one of the things this author did is I have certain hot buttons when I'm reading. And one of the things that I really truly dislike is flying humans. The human body is not aerodynamic and cannot fly. Yeah, human beings cannot fly, okay? So this book does feature flying humans. And the author went to great pains to describe why humans cannot fly, even with magic, but this magic is so special, it allows humans to fly. And if you're listening to this and haven't read it and don't want a little spoiler, close your ears for about 15 seconds. Basically, someone discovered Einstein's theory of gravity and turned that into a magical way to have people fly. So I'm not going to get into everything, but of course, the thief Sancha hooks up with the wharf master Danilo to fight a dastardly evil plot that is threatening to destroy the city. Now, did I like the book? Yeah, I sort of liked the book. I finished reading it. Would I continue to the other 2 books in the series? Maybe not. If Audible ever offered the second book in the series as a 2-for-1 sale, I would probably pick it up, but otherwise I would just let it slide, and there are other books that I can read, and this one is just not a high priority. The second book I finished was also an audiobook, and that was A Bookshop in Berlin, the rediscovered memoir of one woman's harrowing escape from the Nazis. And this is nonfiction, of course, and it is the story of a Jewish woman who opened a bookstore in Berlin in the 1920s. And of course, as the Nazis took power, having a Jewish woman run a French language bookstore, I don't think I mentioned that she was running a French language bookstore in Berlin, it became increasingly problematic for her to continue operating this bookstore. And so she has to get out of Germany, go into France, and she has lots of trouble in France with the Germans because they've already taken over. And what this book does is present a very strong woman and her ordeals to survive. And I'd like to just contrast that a little bit with the previous fantasy book, where the character was a young female with basically magical powers, and she's fighting great evil all on her own, and she was supposed to be presented as this really strong woman who can outwit the evildoers. But this book, this nonfiction book, shows the strength of a woman much better than a fantasy character ever could, because this is a woman who truly had to endure human horrors and show people who are truly heroic. These are people who protected her because she was a Jewish and the Nazis were hunting her. And I can highly recommend A Bookshop in Berlin. The only real thing I have is that there's not a lot of details about the bookshop in Berlin. After about the first third, there's no more bookshop. It's been sold, it's been taken over by the Nazis. But a highly recommended book nonetheless. I have finished Vernon Supertex #2 by Virginie Dupont, translated from the French by Wynn. This is the middle book of a trilogy. Now, I have mentioned this book a few times on my channel before. I am reading this as a read-along with the 2-month review podcast, which is recorded live on YouTube. I will provide links to both the podcast and the YouTube recordings. Now, I said before, this is the story of Vernon Supertex, who used to own a famous record store in Paris. And he introduced a lot of people to music through this record store. And one of these people that he introduced was a young kid who eventually became a very famous musician. And once Vernon Supertex lost his record store due to the economy, this musician was basically providing Vernon with rent. He would send Vernon 3 months worth of rent, then Vernon would get in the airs. He'd go back to his rock star buddy and say, I'm out of money, and the rock star would give him more money. But then the rock star overdosed on drugs, and Vernon had no way to pay his rent, and he became homeless. And this book has a lot of interesting characters. They would not be considered mainstream characters, I suppose. There are porn stars, there are drug addicts, there are male transsexuals and female transsexuals, and they all intermingle and swarm around Vernon. And it comes to the point that Vernon is almost a secondary character in his own trilogy, because the stories are about how these people interact with Vernon. And essentially, Vernon is becoming a homeless guru at the end of the second book. And that's really not much of a spoiler. It's just the story arc. And I don't know where exactly the story is going to go, other than I have bought the 3rd volume, and I will be continuing to read this. And I've read both books as ebooks, and I bought the 3rd one as an ebook. And I've been enjoying them quite a lot. If you think this is something you'd be interested, you can always go back and check out the podcast or check out the videos. It's recommended. The next books I finished was The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler. Now this is a book that I have read twice before, and I think this book gets better with every read. I really truly enjoyed the way Chandler writes. I enjoy his character, Philip Marlowe. He is a private detective who stretches the law. He will overlook a murder for a day or so before reporting it to police if he thinks he can gain information that will help his clients. And while it's a little underhanded, it's not so underhanded that it doesn't make him an interesting character or a bad man. He's got a very solid ground in ethics. And the basic story of this is of an old general who has two naughty daughters. They're a handful. They're wild. The elder daughter married someone that she should not have married. He was a bootlegger when there was prohibition. This story is set after prohibition. But the man that she marries disappears, and then the old man gets basically a blackmail note saying, "Pay me $5,000," and he hires Philip Marlowe to discover who is blackmailing him. And I don't want to get into the details of the plot, but it's well worth your effort if you have not picked up The Big Sleep. Now, I am going to read a little bit from the very end of the book. It's not a spoiler because I'm going to leave out the names of the characters. And this paragraph basically gives the novel its title. What did it matter where you lay once you were dead? In a dirty sump or in a marble tower on the top of a hill? You were dead. You were sleeping the big sleep. You were not bothered by things like that. Oil and water were the same as wind and air to you. You just sleep the big sleep, not caring about the nuances of how you died or where you fell. Me, I was part of that nastiness now. And that basically just describes Philip Marlowe's summation of his case. And please do pick that up. And those are the books that I completed last week. I am currently reading Flashman by George MacDonald Fraser. And this for me is a reread again. I am going to be attempting to reread the entire Flashman series. I am also listening to Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Idiot on Audible. This is a very long novel. It's over 700 pages. I still have about 18 hours on that audiobook to go, so I will be talking about that more later. Thank you for listening, and have a good evening. Goodbye.